welcome to the Brothers Random Show. My name is Travis.
I'm Michael.
And we are two ordinary brothers discussing extraordinary ideas and some random shit. So some of the topics that we do on this show vary from theology, masculinity, movies, philosophy, books, pop culture, and many other subjects. We will be talking about the people we admire and the wisdom that they share. Standing on the shoulders of giants, people such as Ben Shapiro, Thomas Sowell, Megyn Kelly, Larry Elder, Gary Vaynerchuk, Barry Weiss, Mike Rowe, and pretty much everyone over at the Daily Wire, and especially from Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, who we believe is the sage of our time. If you are offended by the previously mentioned people or Dr. Peterson, we ask you kindly to move on and fuck off. Michael, how's it going?
How's it going? Today we are talking about Exodus episode 3. We've kind of continued on. We'll be going through each episode, just kind of doing a commentary. The Exodus episodes are behind the Daily Wire paywall, so we highly recommend that you check those out. And hopefully we'll, bring in some of our own thoughts and things to add that will be of value. This episode, I wanted to mention, it seemed like there was a most valuable player in this episode, an MVP, and that was Dennis Prager. He throws out some awesome truth bombs, and we'll kind of walk through some of it, but we'll get to some of his truth bombs that he throws out that I just loved. Starting out, though, basically, Jordan will read what's going on in the text from the scriptures, and then they talk about it. One of the things is that reading from the scripture, that there's a part where the women of the Hebrews were going to go get the riches from the Egyptians, and thinking, theoretically, mythologically, Jonathan Pageau says basically the fact that they're going and getting these riches from the Egyptians is analogous of trying to get whatever good things you can from other cultures. I thought this was interesting because it's always been growing up. Go ahead.
And James Orr points out the pagan texts were preserved by monasteries.
Interesting.
So he basically said that there is wisdom to learn from ancient traditions. And so this is kind of people think that this might be cultural appropriation. This is more like we are going to take the good things from a culture and integrate it into this other culture. And that, right. I mean, that's anything, right? That's like when you're born into a family and you grow up and you leave and go to start your own family, you take the wisdom that you learned from your old family into, and maybe get rid of the bad things
and hopefully get rid of whatever was not good. Yep. Totally. So from there. And then I love that Jordan Peterson mentions that they talk about women a lot every so often, just because women so often are heroes of the story throughout the Exodus. And I didn't even realize, like, I just reading over it, you kind of glean over and it's a story about Moses, so therefore it's about the patriarchy, whatever. No, women are the heroes of the story over and over and over again throughout the text. And like, I don't think people really realize or internalize that and JP says that education of women is the best economic predictor. So when you
or a society
allows for their women to read and be educated and make decisions and be free,
that means that your society is doing well. It's progressing upwards. Yes, it's a very and that's in all societies. So even ancient ones, the ancient ones that allowed women to learn and go to school and become educated, We're always
And this flies
considerate.
in the face. This flies in the face of people out there, progressives, the lefties that think and say that the Christians out there, the Christian patriarchy, they just want to, take women
Yeah.
and enslave them
No.
and not teach them to read and get back in the kitchen and blah blah blah, all that stuff. We are not saying that, supporting that.
Well, it's bullshit,
Yeah,
because when a
yeah,
society does well, its women are doing well.
you're right.
That's how
Right.
you
So
judge a society on how it's doing. So all the societies that are doing terrible, like in Afghanistan, they
yeah,
don't allow their women to be educated, right? So
yeah,
and they have to wear the burqa, and you can only see their eyes, and just really archaic shit that isn't good for their society. And their society is poor, and that's and downtrodden.
yeah.
So that's a perfect example of it,
Case in
right?
point. Case in point, right? And the staff actually, I think they go into the staff uh, being kind of representing tradition, right?
Well, order and chaos.
Right? Yeah, because
So
the staff,
the staff turns into a serpent. So the staff itself is order, and the serpent is
yep.
chaos.
And this is the scene where Moses is talking to God, and he's like, I just don't know if I can do this, God. And then God says, well, let me prove to you. Put your hand in your cloak and it'll come out leprous, and
Yeah.
then put it back in and then it'll come out good. And then you take your staff and it'll turn into a serpent, and then take it up again and it'll turn back into a staff.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's kind of it's I we were chatting a little bit ago about the book of Eli kind of being like a dream. This kind of seems a little bit like a dream, right? There's some kind of weird stuff going on
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Paggio, and they talk about how the staff represents tradition, but it will turn into a snake, which represents chaos. And you're kind of it's a going back and forth between the two, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So uh anyway,
I wanted to move into what Prager. So Dennis Prager, who, like you previously mentioned, had a very, like, was kind of the MVP of this. He says, and they start talking about belief in God, and how uh, Moses keeps arguing with him, right? And so
mhm,
and Prager says non-belief in God is what is leading our society to chaos. That goes
mm,
back to the chaos. And even if you don't believe in God, you need to understand the necessity of a society that believes in God.
yep. And I wrote down the quote: the argument for God's existence are
Yeah.
not as nearly as effective as arguments for God's necessity.
Yeah. So
And yeah.
let's delve into that. So it's basically, so I've seen interviews with atheists. I've talked to atheists, and even in their non-belief, they still believe the good. Basically, the good atheist is the person who believes, oh, there is a necessity for this, for religion.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get rid of the necessity for religion, you find a state. You're in a state of, like Egypt. There's a bunch of people who have slaves, and they have enslaved an entire another nation. And so basically,
People don't take into account, Dennis says this quote, consequences of the death of the divine.
yeah,
Right.
and we're
And
living through those consequences now in our own society. When when um when people are less so people get more angry about the death of an animal, a dog, than they do about the lives and deaths of people in the Uyghur concentration camps in China. So it's
yeah.
like, so people so when they get rid of God, right, and you don't have God in your life anymore, the evil is good and the good is evil. That's what we're seeing now in our society. Things have been turned on their head so that people do not value, they're more likely to value the death of a dog or than the death of a human, you know.
And in Jordan Peterson comes back to Nietzsche, who basically said, he kind of stated the death of God, and we've talked about this a couple times, stating the death of God,
lamenting,
but he's lamenting it.
Yeah.
And a lot of Christians, use him as the ultimate horrible thing. He said that God was dead. No, he was lamenting, and he said that we wouldn't be able to contain all the blood that would be shed in the aftermath of killing God.
Yeah, basically meaning that it's going to be hard to go back, right? He's like, we've done this, and now we can't. Society won't be able to get back to the belief, and it's and Nietzsche lived 200 years ago, so it's like very slow decline in society since he said those infamous words,
right. Yeah. So and Dennis goes on, he says the greatest argument for God is what happens without God, right?
Oh yeah. So Jordan Peterson says this. He says something along the lines of we know what we have with God, then what do we do when we get without him? So
what do we get? Yeah, what do we get without him?
Yeah. We don't have a centralized order, something that we can all agree on, the great, as being the greatest possible good. That's what we get without him. So now we're in a society now that's like that, right? Where nobody can agree on anything. You can't agree on what is a woman, right?
Yeah. That goes into the chaos, and Dennis talks about this, is that we've gone into a chaos that is, we've gone way too far into chaos because we don't know what a woman is. Men menstruate is he mentions is a statement of chaos, right? And kids are coming up confused because they don't even know what's what, and how can you when that's the standard, right? So one thing I loved what Dennis said. He says the greatest argument for atheism is never given by atheists, it's given by bad religious people. And he goes on, good religious people are the best arguments for God's existence, and bad religious people are the best arguments for atheism. And I love this because
this is very interesting, because you always hear about somebody who went to church and they saw, oh, there's Jenny, what's her name, and she's such a nasty person, and she's so mean, and she's going to church and all that kind of stuff. And that's what puts people off, right? They're like, well, why are these people coming to church, with their piety, and then here they are, they're evil people. I remember some in the town that we lived in, some of the most prominent religious members of the LDS church in the town we lived in were, the rumor was they were the drug dealers in town. And I was like,
and could have been very well true. Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't know it for a fact. It was just kind of rumored, but that's a little messed up, right? If that's true, then that means like the most prominent members of the highest religious order in our town that we grew up in were corrupt.
Well, and we're going to have a relative of ours on to talk about their kind of path to atheism. And one thing that Jordan Peterson mentions is that he has noticed that a lot of people who have a problem with religion have in some way been burned by somebody in the religion. Usually, not always, not always, but and I would say, and I've heard people say this, but basically that the faith is true, but the people are not. Right. So,
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
and
That's a
or the
good way to
church is
say it.
true and the
Yeah.
people are not. Right.
Well,
So,
and I said this before. I've said this before on this show. Is like, what's the biggest problem with religion? It's people. That's the biggest
yeah,
problem with religion, because
yeah,
there's always going to be somebody who's not that good, who's preaching that they are, or preaching to everybody that they are. There's
mhm,
always going to be that. And so a lot of people who get led to atheism, their first issue is with, like Prager says, is with something that happened to them in their religious organization.
yeah, by the people in the religious organization,
Yeah.
and he says, Dennis mentions, he's like, my prayer is that anybody who is a bad religious person will become atheist or become good, right?
Yeah.
So there's, and I love that, because there there we wish there could be just a standard. One is we're humans, right? So humans f up, it just happens, right?
Yeah.
We're none of us are perfect. We're all, and I think one of the biggest problems is that, and people coming out of these religions,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the hypocrisy of it. I am perfect, and then they see that they're not perfect.
Yeah.
These
And then other,
people leave,
yeah.
and they're just like, they claimed that they were perfect, and
Well, and that's
they did all these
hypocrisy.
things, right?
It seems to be worse. Like, us humans have hypocrisy in everything, you know,
Yeah.
but it seems to be worse in religion, because everybody's like, I don't know why it's worse in religion. It seems to, I mean, maybe because you can actually pinpoint it. You can go,
So, and it could be that there is, so in religious belief, there is a standard, right? There's a star to kind of work towards,
work
or
towards,
go towards, right? So you have
the greatest
an
possible
ethic,
good.
a higher, greatest possible good, right? That you're trying to get to, right? Well, in the organization, there's going to be people who like everybody else thinking they're closer to that star than everybody else,
Yeah, virtue
right?
signaling.
So, yeah, 100%, right? And what's funny is we came from a cult, but we can see cult-like mentalities in some of the organizations out there. So the I think the problem is that somebody tries to put off their persona that they're closer to that star than everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe sometimes it's like a
Well,
bullying thing, right?
yeah,
I'm
it's
closer to it,
well, it
therefore
happened with
I'm going to
COVID.
bully
It
you.
happened with COVID. It was it became a religion wherein you could show everybody your virtue by wearing a mask.
2 masks,
Like,
4
oh,
masks.
4 masks. I look how virtuous I am. I am more virtuous than you, because I have 4 masks on my face. It's like,
Yep.
this
And
is religious / cult like mentality. This is
right.
what humans do. This is
And
they've been doing it.
growing up, we're eventually we'll have this guy on, I think, but growing up, this guy taught me, Nathan will probably be on our show sometime, but this guy, he taught me that there is a sense of gradual piety that can grow in a religion, and that gradual piety would, and a good example is that the whoever was working in the tabernacle this is in Jewish times,
Mm-hmm.
that whoever was working in the tabernacle like had to wash their hands, right? Okay, so you wash your hands, but you'd get people come along and they're like, well, you know what, it's better to wash your hands 2 times, right? And then the next guy who come
That's the
along, he's
mask
like,
situation with COVID.
I'm going to be so close to God. I'm going to be so holy that I'm going to wash my hands 3 times. Right. And it became this grandstanding, and the grandstanding would just kind of go
Human
on
nature.
and on
It's
and on.
human nature.
And I think it's just a human nature thing where it's trying to like up the next one.
Yeah.
Right. You're just trying to,
upsmanship.
I'm just trying to be, and I think that was exactly what was going on with the mask thing with
Yeah,
COVID.
it's just one
It's
up.
just like,
You're like, look.
I care about everyone so much that I'm going to wear my mask in my car when I'm by myself. Right. Like I'm going to care about everyone so much that I'm going to wear not 1, not 2, but 3 masks because I care about my society. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not just going to get the vaccine. I'm going to get, the 12 different boosters that came out.
Yeah, that came out. Yeah.
So you see it in religion, you see it in politics. It happens. It's there. So,
so I've one of the other subjects that I wanted to get into is this this idea of the unintrusive God, and they kind of get into this because Dennis Prager is very much against people who believe in this kind of idea that God is not
the divine butler.
The divine butler is the opposite of the unintrusive God. So the divine butler is basically you ask God for all these things and you don't get any of them. Or you do get it and you attribute them to God giving them to you, right?
Yeah.
So the divine butler is the opposite of the unintrusive.
Well, and he says he's not supporting that. He's like, I don't think people and my Christian friends don't like it when I talk about this, but I do not see God as this divine butler.
That
I get to pray for with, whatever I want.
Well, right? It's an interesting idea because they also, I think Greg Horowitz talks about this. He's basically like, well, maybe asking God for what you want isn't the answer. Maybe it's because maybe you should be asking God to become somebody who can achieve what you want. Which is very interesting because I've through my life, the unintrusive God. So I believe God exists, but I'm not exactly sure how often he's come into my life to help me out. Like I'm one of those
how much he gets involved.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that kind of believes that he just kind of threw us on here and then just let us kind of figure it out as we go.
Well, and that goes to some kind of Jewish traditions that we've talked about. One that gets mentioned is you kind of Greg Horowitz kind of mentioned that maybe it's not about just praying for something, but praying that you can become something. And it that kind of goes to repair the world. The repair of the world is it's kind of a tikkun olam. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is kind of a teaching in Jewish tradition that it's our job to repair.
Do you have it written down, Michael? Can you spell it?
Yeah, tikkun olam.
Okay. And so that's a Jewish tradition of
and it basically means repair of the world. So that God kind of created the world and then steps back and he kind of retracts his light and then gives it to us to have the job of repairing the world.
Yeah.
Right. So, and that kind of goes into like, being a good person, raising your family right, going out there and I love this because in the book Lynchpin, Seth Godin, I for a while there I was kind of a huge Seth Godin fan, and I read a bunch of his books. And in the book Lynchpin, he talks about to be a linchpin, basically a leader in the community, in the society, you need to be able to identify what is broken and then work to fix it. Right. So that's kind of his definition of a leader or a linchpin.
Well, that's what
is
Moses is doing, right? He's fixing.
There's something broken. God calls him to fix it.
God
right?
calls him to fix it.
So, and that's like, that kind of goes to you repair the world, right? So your call is to repair the world. So yeah, love that.
Yeah. And this, so most of the people on the panel, this seminar reject the idea of the unintrusive God. Because, you know, Dennis Prager tells a story about he's prayed 2 times and God has answered it. You know, I don't know. I think with a lot of, I think a lot of Judaism, they pray a lot, but I think it's more out of, I think Ben Shapiro was talking about it. It's more out of like even if you don't feel like praying, you continue to do it because at some point you're going to actually feel like it, and you've already created the habit to do it on a regular basis. And then at some point you'll have a low point in your life where you really need this prayer, and you'll be more into it then.
Yeah. And Dennis tells the story of his
teacher,
Hebrew teacher that says he like, okay, it's time to pray, everybody. And then he goes and he's just like, I don't feel like praying. And he's like, or I'm not in the mood. I'm not in the mood. He's like, so what? You're not in the mood? Who cares? Go pray. You know, and so I think that's,
so
that just goes to like discipline, right?
Yeah, that goes to Jocko Willink, right? He's always like freedom equals discipline. And so if you're always disciplined in this, even though you don't ever feel like praying, but if you make it like this thing that you do all the time, that at some point there's going to be a click where maybe that prayer is the one that you really need to say, and
right?
Maybe God hears that one, you know, because if you go back to like the Israelites, they had been in bondage for years, right? And so and God finally hears their prayer.
Well, and to one of the earlier episodes, God finally hears their prayer. It's tough to know whether God finally hears their prayer, or there's finally somebody that God can work with to fix the problem, to repair the world, right?
Repair the world. Yeah.
So that was Moses. And so we hear the story of Moses, and it lays out a story of Moses. But if Moses wasn't Moses, then there might have not been this story, right?
Then,
it kind of goes to,
if there wasn't a man to raise to that level, then maybe there wouldn't be the story so
yeah. And
it's a chicken before the egg kind of thing, right?
And I was thinking about this. We were watching the Two Towers with my kids last night. Lord of the Rings, the Two Towers. And there's a really funny how it should have ended out there, a little clip of how Lord of the Rings should have ended. I don't know if you've seen it. Where
I might have. Yeah.
They're all sitting there and they say, and the Fellowship of the Ring gets, made, and Gandalf, they're all like, okay, well, how are we going to do this? And Gandalf's like, I have an idea. And he basically calls the eagles, and Frodo gets on the eagle, and he goes up above and he drops the ring into the fire. Like, that's it.
That's the end.
It's done. It's done. That's the end. So I was thinking about it while I was watching this, the story of the Two Towers kind of pan out. And it's kind of like, it is really one of those things where it's like, oh, well, if God's all powerful, then why didn't he just make it happen? Right.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. The point is, there wouldn't be a story to tell if these series of events didn't happen. Right.
Yeah.
And that's the same with Lord of the Rings. I was just thinking about it while we were watching it.
Well,
I was
then
like,
there's no story, right?
It really is true that Gandalf really could have just figured a way to kind of get these eagles to come
Yeah.
and pick them up and go. And
But then you wouldn't have a story.
We wouldn't have the story.
And the
Like none
journey.
of the story
Yeah.
would have happened.
Yeah.
Right. And so I love that they considering that, this is a story that helps us in our own lives, that there's something broken and God calls, and
we need to rise up to fix it.
Right. And even and Moses is the reluctant hero, right?
Yeah.
And I love this because we talked about Gladiator, and we talked about Braveheart, where William Wallace and Maximus are these kind of reluctant heroes, right? Marcus Aurelius offers Maximus to be the keeper of Rome, and he's like, with all my heart, no, right? I do not want this. Braveheart, William Wallace says he doesn't want to fight, right? His father-in-law asks him to a council to talk about maybe going against the English, and
he's like,
no, do this. I don't want to do that.
I just want peace. Yeah.
I just want peace. And so, and then you got Moses, who's being called, and he's like, well, I can't really speak, God. Like, come on, God, I'm not really your guy.
He gives like 3 different excuses, doesn't he? Like a bunch. He's giving a bunch.
He kind of keeps going back to it too. He's
like,
just
who am I? Who am I to do this? And God keeps telling him. I wonder if there's any other. Are there any other points you wanted to make?
Let's see. So I think anyway, to kind of wrap up that point, I guess.
Yeah.
God can use you. So they talk about this, the providential shipwreck, right? You are a shipwreck, and Moses was a shipwreck, right? But he was still able to be used to do something great. So
maybe that's what we all can learn from, is that we're all like the providential shipwreck.
Yeah, we're all shipwrecks, and we can be used to do something great. Maybe sometimes reluctantly, but go do something great regardless. And God is that thing that calls you out of your comfort zone to go and do something to repair the world. So that's kind of what I had to say about that. If you want to, did you they kind of got into the circumcision story?
I don't know.
And I have kind of my own take on that. We don't have to get into it too deep, but basically what happens is it sounds like God was going to kill somebody, either Moses or Moses' son. And so the wrath of God was kindled against Moses or Moses' son.
Yeah, because he kept saying, I don't want to do this.
And it's kind of it switches, and it goes to the circumcision story, and then it's out of the story, right? It's just a quick little thing in there. And I think I know what the point of this story is, right? The point is that Moses was going to be the leader of the Hebrew people, and his son wasn't circumcised. And so he hadn't followed the law. Okay. He hadn't followed the law, and there were consequences to that.
The Israelite law. Well, this goes back to them forgetting his name, God's name, right?
Right.
So Prager talks about, there's this interesting discussion that they have with the name of God and how the Israelites had forgotten the name. So this is very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to get into something else. Maybe you want to make your point about the.
Sure, maybe I should make my point, and then you can make yours.
Okay,
so I'll finish up with my point, and that is that Moses had not kept the law, and so his wife makes sure he does keep the law. He
does keep the law. Yeah.
So, and they didn't mention this much. They don't really talk about it much, but I feel like what this is saying is that it is another one of those things where the woman comes to be the hero, right?
Yeah.
The woman kind of saves the day here because the man hasn't done what he needed to do, and so the mother has come in and said,
This is
this
something
is
you
going
need
to happen, right? God's
Yeah.
law is going to be, and it makes
And-
me think of like Christian women that will uphold and want their families to be raised in a Christian home.
Mhm.
I feel like it is very powerful in this sense because she's basically like, screw you, Moses, you haven't done what you needed to do. So in this home, we're going to make this happen.
I think this is what's happening in our society. I think women were always the ones to get men to do something that men didn't want to do, right? And
Yep.
now the women aren't doing that, and so both of us are failing.
Not to push all the blame on them.
No, that's not to put the blame on them, but here's the thing is that if you read all these stories, they're always the women are always driving the men to what's the saying, behind every great man is a good woman pushing him to be great.
Yeah.
So it's not, it kind of negates the responsibility from the man if you think of it that way, but it's not really. What it's really doing is like I've said before, they should be working together to go up. Well, one's not working and the other's not working, and it's just all the way down. Everybody's just going down.
A race to the bottom.
A race to the bottom.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
That's where we find ourselves in our society, is because both sexes are negating their responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
They're what's the word? I can't think of it. They're basically their responsibility. They're shirking their responsibilities.
Yeah.
To the opposite sex, right? So that's where, and that's why we have so many of these videos. There's tons of videos all over YouTube about women going, how do you get this man? Or and men going, well, how do you get this woman? It's like, well, neither one of you are worthy of a good person or a good woman. How about you both shape up? And that's where we find ourselves.
Well, and that it could be that call that I've talked about with that men will meet. So women hold the standard of sex, and men will meet that and not much more.
Not much more,
right? Yeah. So this story could be analogy of this, right?
Yeah, where she's going, you need to follow the laws of your people. If you're going to be the leader of your people, because we got to remember he was raised Egyptian, right? Yeah. So his people, and this, I don't think this gets,
and he was not circumcised. Kind of a funny note, but there is no record of him being circumcised, so it's very possible that he had a problem. He didn't want to deal with it, so it's something that he just wanted to push off and didn't want to deal with, and as any man would. Right. Well, sometimes men sometimes do this, where it's just like, it's a problem, I just don't want to deal with it, right? Well, and especially if they're going to cut something off your junk. I wouldn't want to deal with it either. It's like, what? And no, I'm not going to do that. I wouldn't want to get into like the, whatever pros and cons, modern day, like pros and cons or anything like that. But the point is that there was a tenet of the faith that was not being upheld in the home. And so the woman said, we are going to uphold this in the home. And that's pretty good. And it saves, whose life it saves, we don't really know, but I think it saves Moses's life. I think Moses was the one that God was going to kill here. Right. Yeah. I think God was like, whoa, wait a minute. You're not going to uphold this law I have. And okay, I got to take you out. Even before I've already put all this effort into you, but if you're not going to uphold this and you're going to lead this people, I got to start over, right? This doesn't work. I got to find somebody else who might be worthy of it. So then his wife saves it, right? So, well, okay. So this leads into what I was, I'm starting to believe that because
the Israelites were in bondage for so long that they had mostly all forgotten their traditions. So this whole idea of them forgetting the name of God, because they don't know the name of God, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I don't know, but I want to say that later on there is a point. Yeah. So later on there is a point where basically God was like, "Hey, I'm going to help you with this, but before I help you with this, all of you have to start observing the traditions again." Right?
yeah,
So they had
yeah.
all forgotten and stopped
Stop
observing the
the well,
traditions.
and this is what happens when people are enslaved. So hear this out.
Yeah.
So I recently read Uncle Tom's Cabin, which has come under fire for stupid shit. But anyway, Uncle Tom's Cabin was this book that was written in the early 1800s that chastised all forms of slavery and essentially became this huge bestseller. And some people attribute to the drive of the Civil War to free the slaves. And this is very interesting because the in the book there's a point where there's other slaves. So that Uncle Tom is the main character of the book, and he keeps getting sold to different slaves. So he starts out with a benevolent slave owner who's good to him, and another one he gets sold to another one that's good to him, but he abruptly gets sold due to circumstances in the book to a really terrible slave owner, and he owns a bunch of slaves. And Uncle Tom's being good and kind to all these other slaves, but because this slave owner is so brutal, he's made all of the slaves brutal.
Mm.
And they are brutal to each other. There's no camaraderie among them. And they're just and they're really terrible to each other. So this is very interesting to me because I think that they had forgotten their way or what was good in life for them.
Yeah.
Because of the evil of slavery. So it had permeated into their own lives, right?
Right.
And this is where they talk about them, the Israelites, not knowing God's name, which I think is more metaphorical for them just not knowing God's traditions at all.
Right. They've forgotten how to be the good person to each other.
Well, not just that, but they just forgotten all their Jewish traditions, right?
Yeah.
They like, and it goes back to the circumcision with Moses, is like none of them were practicing any of their religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And because of that, they were not only truly enslaved, but they were metaphorically enslaved as well, because they weren't
Kind of spiritually enslaved.
spiritually enslaved.
Yeah.
That's the same thing with the slaves in Uncle Tom's Cabin, is that they're these downtrodden people who are going to cause atrocities to their own people because they have completely forgotten basically what it's like to be human and to have any kind of camaraderie towards their fellow man. Anyway, that's a thought I had during that. But we're well into this, Michael. What do you want?
Yeah. I think that was good.
That was good.
Yeah, it's about an hour. I mean, we almost got an hour there. So
yeah, and just for the listening audience, we're probably never going to actually get through the entirety of a Exodus seminar episode. We're just going to talk about the ideas that they have in them until we lose the time. So but yeah, we strongly suggest that anybody listening go out there and check out the Exodus seminar episodes. They're very good, and this was our third one.
Yeah.
And we will be continuing on. We like, things happen, and we like to intersperse and change it up, and that's what we're doing. So
that's why it's random.
that's why it's random. So Anyway, do you have any final thoughts?
Nope. So it's good. We'll see you guys next time.
We are still we are now on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I like to put that out. Do you have any of the social media that you'd like to
Totally.
push?
Yeah. So we got at the Brothers Random on Instagram. Our Twitter is at Brothers V Random, or at Brothers V Random, and our YouTube is the Brothers Random. So at the Brothers Random. So
okay. So the Twitter handle's at Brothers V Random.
Yep.
It's not at the end. Oh, okay. For some reason,
yeah.
Okay.
Our email, if anybody wants to email us, is thebrothersrandomv@gmail.com. So
okay. All right. Another good one in the bag, Michael.
Have a good day.
Have a good day. Bye.